Tuesday, January 16th, 2018 meeting of the Acton Conservation and Forestry Committee. Carl Davis and Mark Hurd are absent. Are you missing anybody else? That's it, right? Okay. We'll check over the minutes from previous meeting, December 19th. Packet there, thanks, Brittany. Motion to approve the minutes?
Second?
That's it? Okay.
I think I would do what you needed first.
Minutes approved then? Okay, thank you. Looking at the agenda for tonight, we did speak to Board of Selectmen, and I don't have the date in front of me, I'm sure. Must have been the meeting immediately following when we approved the, it was the following meeting, I guess, to the approval of this board of the abutters letter draft. I don't have the date on that, but they did, they were pleased with the letter and pleased with what we were up to and said, you folks can move forward with and with Jen Rue and the town clerk's office help, we got the mailing out, and with Whitney's good help, we got the mailing out on the 10th, which would have been when? Friday? Yeah, okay. And there were approximately, I think she said 16, 18, somewhere in there, butters. And the way, if you recall, or you have in your packet tonight, the form letter to the abutters is being mailed back to Town Hall and put in our mailbox. So it has a comment section on it. And or they can call, give them Carl's phone number or email address. Anybody remember which?
I'm not sure Jennifer would have put that in when she updated it.
Yeah, she did.
Okay.
Because she and I spoke on the day she was.
I think both were in there.
Okay.
Right, I think Carl seemed a little more amenable to having them both in there than
Okay.
perhaps I might be.
Well, I think you probably figured a lot of those people don't have email.
Exactly, yep.
So hopefully we'll get some response from the abutters and we can schedule a meeting with an invite to the folks that responded to us and maybe make an effort to recontact those folks that didn't return a comment to us on the abutters list. And probably, I don't know, there might be two public meetings there, one for the abutters and one for the general public, I guess, I don't know. I don't, actually, in my mind, I don't have a sense of this is going to go to town meeting, but, I mean, whether it's gonna be right to go to this June's town meeting, I don't know. Kind of depends on the response we get and how much beating of the bushes on Eagle Iowa Road we have to do to elicit some sense of, you know, how they feel about it. 'Cause I would feel a little not confident about the success of this if we didn't make the best effort we could, you know, to contact the public on it. There is one other little thing in your packet, which was, I asked the selectmen if we could recontact Joe Lankowski, the town's land use lawyer, pertaining to some specific information regarding the width of the right-of-way. And prior to that request, I had called and spoken to Dana Libby, who I think is the proprietor of Corner Post.
Yep.
And he mentioned a county commissioner's records as being accessible from the internet. Have you ever delved into that?
Sorry.
No? I think for my own peace of mind, I would like to corroborate with a little research on our end, if we could, what he relayed to me, because Joe's letter dated, or the email response he made to Jen, dated 1/3/2018. Everybody get that in there?
Mm-hmm.
He refers back almost entirely on Dana Libby's interpretation of, I'm reading now, of the old county road records. So I got the sense that Joe did not do any research on his own. He was just reliant upon a conversation I had with Dana. So the information I gleaned from Dana was that and these were what he called county commissioner records, and he did, as we were talking, it sounded like he had them up on his computer screen. And he did say as much, that they are readily available, but I was remiss in not getting the email address. So maybe we can affirm what he told me. And this was that and do you mind maybe doing this? If I can get you the email address? Okay. In volume 28, page 81, is the first citation, there is a record in 1850 that the Heba Road was accepted as a county way and at a 3-rod width, which is 42.5 feet. And then in 1937, there's another mention of it in County Commissioner Records, volume 9, page 97. The road was discontinued subject to gates and bars, and we had a previous interpretation from Dana that, no, excuse me, not Dana, but Joe, that language in his legal interpretation means that public access was never extinguished, or was retained, I guess is the more proper way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
He did cite Maine State Statutes, Title 23, Section 2103, as the general verbiage under which roads are abandoned and or discontinued. I don't know if we have to go there, but that would be two places we could look to corroborate our contention from Joe that we have a public easement remains on that road, which I would really like to go the extra effort to affirm that rather than standing flat-footed in a meeting sometime and saying, having somebody contest it and having no basis to it.
Right, well, before you come up to public meeting, I don't mean in June, but before you bring in a public hearing,
Yeah.
that's gonna be question number one
Right,
that's posed, and
right.
you're gonna have to be able to make sure that we've got some valid leg to stand on,
Right.
rather than, I don't know, right off the bat, otherwise your credibility's gone.
You can see from Joe's letter dated 1/3, well, I'm a little, why I'm a little
Yep.
nervous there. Oh, and the second citation, the 1937 County Commissioner records, I think he said volume 9, but it may be volume 19. So,
I'm gonna copy your notes if I could at the end.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, I should have made I thought I was gonna have a clerk's office help here tonight, but they're all flown the coop. So that's all I have news for Eagle High Road project. And next steps, I guess we'll proceed with our PR work on this once hopefully we get some response back from others. And
Okay, so just to reiterate, and make sure that I understand what I'm hearing. We are understanding from both the lawyer and from Dana that there is a public way still there,
Yeah,
and it is at the full width of the creation of the road as originally laid out. So
yeah,
toward our goal and comments and future work on establishing or monitoring or changing that road's use,
mhm,
my interpretation is that we're saying that there is no disallowing anyone from using the road,
as far as I can
is the
tell.
way I'm understanding that to read, right?
Yeah,
So so the first comment that'll be brought up is, it's a private road, no, it was discontinued to its center line, you now own to its center line, but the easement still goes back out to the essentially the wall.
right,
But there is no restriction on who, or necessarily right now, what its use is.
right, right.
Okay.
I think the working sense would be that the public easement was retained.
Mhm.
I think that's the way they expressed it.
Yep.
And
Well, it must have been a pretty big deal road to be accepted by the county and be 3 rods wide.
yeah, I don't know what I told you before, I think I might have misstated. 3 rods, Dana said was equivalent to 42 and a half feet.
All right, well, a rod is 16 and a half feet, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it's
well, I don't know where the hell he got 42 and a half.
Or
41 and a half. It's 41 and a half.
Okay, well, I'm close, maybe I'm off by
Okay,
Fine.
a foot, but
No, 16 and a half feet is correct.
it's a rod,
Be
right?
33 feet plus another 16 and a half.
There we go, okay.
so.
Just don't believe my word for it, but I know what a rod is, but I don't want to have you believe.
Well,
that.
then it's not turning to a lot of people that are convinced that it's just 16 feet. They don't realize that.
There's a half, right?
That there's a half there to
49 there.
Yeah. Um,
16 and a half by 3.
49, yeah.
Yeah, that's,
3 rod, we said?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really wide.
Yeah, that's,
And again, I don't know exactly what the process is going to amount to after we get our feedback. I guess we'll meet again with the Board of Selectmen and get a sense from them or generate a goal amongst ourselves as to what has to happen in terms of making this official. And how the process of a town meeting would be related to this whole process. I'm not quite sure of that. Other than, I mean, if it has the selectmen's blessing, the town meeting would be asked to just reaffirm our findings, or that would be...
well, let me back up and ask, what is the official, what are we trying to judge as being official specifically again?
That there is indeed a public easement existing, and I guess I wouldn't want to go to town meeting with this question, but in a sense, do we want to present to town meeting the option of keeping the easement in place? Or do we have to ask them to endorse the easement or some damn thing? I don't know. What do we-
Well, it is what it is. I guess I want to back up to 30,000 feet here a little bit, I guess, and just say, if the easement, it's the interpretation of what the subject to gates and bars verbiage means that's where the rubber meets the road on this.
Yeah.
If the
Totally.
surveyors and the county definition of what the creation of that subject to gates and bars rules is defined as, is as Libby has put forth here,
Yeah,
then there's no blessing needed, there's no anything other than presumably someone who would contest it, having a court case to try to defeat it.
what about,
So there's no blessing or officiality to it, it is what it is, unless somebody, disagrees.
so the one thing that would come up, and Whitney and I have talked briefly on the phone about this, was the notion of allowed uses, and this is the basis for the omission of the passive, so term passive in our initial draft.
Mhm.
I think that's what is gonna be the issue, so, yeah,
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
definitely.
We read that somebody was using, in the context of our business here, the coexistence, where the hell is that from? Joe's last letter, or first?
Oh, the minutes from last meeting,
Oh, okay.
that was you talking. Old business
Yep, I'm ready.
will be,
And I guess that's where town meeting may or may not, either we make a recommendation and town meeting would endorse that, how would that, what is the legislative process there that you see, Steve, or Whitney? Or Bill?
This, it's, every parcel of property and every piece of property is looked at as, in an appraiser's kind of way, as having a bundle of rights.
Yeah.
And if this one is specifically what is the definition that the town still owns as what can happen on that property. So part of the lay of the land is that it has been deeded back to the center line, so the right of access has been separated from the right of ownership, basically is what's happening.
Yeah.
Rather than owning the road, this town has now given it back to the center line, but kept an easement. So it's been, that bundle of rights
Yeah.
has been separated, that one right out. So yeah, I mean, I guess you have to just go back and say, what is it that the committee and the townspeople are trying to accomplish with this? And then
That,
look at that.
that right is also made more clear to any and all abutters, because they now enjoy the same rights as the general public, and they don't have to, well, I guess they would have had that without the public easement being granted even, right? That's.
Yeah, you're not granting the landowners anything back.
Right, right.
So I guess legally speaking, I mean, I'm maybe speaking out of turn and certainly out of my realm of knowledge, but if you're taking what right was kept by the town and now farther looking to bisect and subsect that right and say now access of this, that, or the other may or may not be allowed on that piece, then are you giving it back to someone? Is it being separated out and parts of it are given back to the, I'm saying you can't, I don't necessarily know if you can just straight up say, we ban ... from this road,
Right.
without actually granting it back to those that have the right to still, that own that property out there. I guess if we were using the idea of motorized vehicles or ATVs or whatever it happens to be,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think legally speaking, you're necessarily going to be able, you can't, or logging or anything, you're not going to be able to take that right from the public realm where it stands now and give it back to each and every individual out there on the road without having a real sticky wicket of what is the specific right that you're granting back, and now to whom very specifically is that right given back to?
Yeah.
And that's gonna be way over my head on that, and,
I'm still stuck on the clarity of what rights the county were giving up by this.
right, well, that's why looking
Rights
at,
the town
right.
had.
So I still don't necessarily, the phrase subject to gates and bars, I'm almost erasing from my mind because it implies something that I don't know is legally on the table here, the gate thing.
Right.
So where that phrase comes from and exactly what it means, I don't have that definition, and presumably somewhere along the line, if that category was created by the county, I'm left to presume there's a definition somewhere, but I see this a lot in what I do, and I know an awful lot of people, surveyors included, and very specifically, perhaps even Dana included,
Yeah.
has not legally tested what that definition means.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what it means in Britain, not in America.
Right.
You still can walk
But
it.
it means that you have a right of way, but somebody can have a kissing gate or what, you can walk on it, you can't necessarily drive through.
Right, but we decided that that's not actually the case as Dana has described it though, correct?
Right, but I'm just saying, that what that's saying though is that there's definitely a right of way there.
Yes, yes. But what's the limitation to that right of way, I guess is what the real question is.
I have a sense that the town could never prescribe any limitation to the use of the road to abutters.
No.
They may be able to prescribe the use, i.e. of mode of transportation, to the general public. That would be.
I don't know the answer to that
I
question.
don't either, but that would be the.
Because this, not to get off subject or anything, but this is quite close to the whole beach access issue.
Yeah.
It's very similar to.
High water, low water,
Yeah.
public access,
Yeah.
does it go to the edge or not, and
Right.
can the public have access to it? And I'm just not quite sure that, I'm certainly not comfortable with it or familiar with enough, legally speaking, to comment on that.
The timber harvesting corollary might be outcome-based versus prescriptive. We would have a goal in the language that we go to a town meeting with for a certain level of civility or so. You know, you wouldn't use that term obviously, but have it such that a certain standard of civility exists in terms of usage of motorized modes of transportation out there, that they will not diminish the enjoyment that a pedestrian would have, which is kind of impossible, but somehow or other we have to thread a needle.
Well,
Continue to.
this is just a personal opinion on my end of things, in that playing a part in the logging and mechanical and vehicle access on these roads in my private, in my public and business life is obviously going to have the definition of that come into play as well. And personally speaking, while I understand the concern over, those bad dots doing to the road, and it's their fault and this fault and the other fault. I'm not one necessarily to personally say right off the bat that banning something is going to be a good idea.
Right.
And it's just me personally, and I would never stand in the way or make a big thing on it of, the groups moving forward with an opinion. But seeing what I see on most of those public ways all the time, there is an awful lot of use of those roads and evolution of those roads that those who would restrict it don't ever see. And then the road isn't necessarily all that much different because of it, but that's where a certain amount of blame is being assigned. I guess I'm not coming off very well describing what I'm getting at, but
Well, I think we're
I see a lot of these roads year by year, and I am seeing them before the so-called abuses, and I'm seeing them a lot after the abuses. And there's definitely abuse, but I just don't know if necessarily looked at over a length of time, over, say, the whole length of the Hebo Harbor Road, or any other of those public ways that necessarily, it's a pretty draconian method, I guess is all I'm trying to say, and I would prefer personally to see some sort of a public group or positive, trail community action that would work this in a positive manner than to have it be restricted if possible, only because I think it's gonna get pretty contentious
Yeah,
otherwise.
I think if that use was, say Dan, I think it's about hard time.
The enforcement would be
From
horrific.
Stilly.
I would argue with
Yeah, and I think that it would still
Yeah.
be used in that way. I think
Right.
Well, I think
We know
what I
it's
was gonna say what bothered me was, one, I found out that it was on a list of that was spread around people that went out mudding.
Oh, for sure.
You
Yeah,
know, that there were, we ran into somebody that was from Tennessee that had read about being able to do that down there, which kind of bothers me. And the other thing about it is that, we used to walk in there with the dog and stuff, and it got so bad, couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Well,
And part of this would be to keep some of the people off the damn roads, where they could go walk somewhere else instead of out on the paved road, which is pretty dangerous, I think.
I don't think if the people have a road with them, thinking of like, people walk anymore.
The town of Sanford, I might have mentioned this before, is working in the form of the Sanford Trails Committee. And my contact there is a fellow by the name of Lee Burnett, who was active on the Sanford Trails Committee. And he has said that in speaking with the town council, they have kind of come up with, the town council has said, we don't know what to do with these complaints that we're getting for motorized vehicles on some of our trails. So we're going to put it to the people, the organizations like the ATV club or something. They were going to convene a meeting and bring these different parties representing organized, mayhem, to the table and say, you folks have to kind of come up with some rules of the road, hopefully, that are not seen as burdensome to the folks that have the same interests as yourself in your ATV or off-road vehicle, whatever. Because if you're going to, we have a goal as townspeople, I guess, speaking of the Sanford example again, of making, first of all, diminishing the abuse and greatly curtailing the complaints we're getting from abutters. I assume these are residents proximate to the Sanford Trail. So that's the path that they're proceeding on, is to hopefully appeal to the good sense of the organized entities as they exist to kind of police their own, So, and I think that's probably maybe a good model to follow.
Right.
I think I'd like to get him and a few other folks back into this conversation, maybe the next meeting or, let's see, February, March. Either in February or March, we have to kind of cement our position on that. Before, if and when we're going to town meeting, we have to have a decision made as to how to diminish the amount of abuse that the road gets from any and all modes of motorized vehicles. And
well, I agree, wholeheartedly agree. The thing that I try to keep separate in my mind and think about when the concept is thrown out there, that I think has a side of a coin or a page in the book, whatever the analogy would be. If the town were to go try to make some movement toward maintaining the condition of the road as a right-of-way, then I think that has a little more credence and less value judgment
Yeah, yeah.
toward being biased against a particular use or for a particular use where it's, and I'll use the example that Bill gave. If you were to say, it's more important that the town give credence and allowing uses toward walking of a dog all the way through the 50, however many miles the Hebo is, as compared to, say, someone who has a four-wheeler, then the public policy is in fact making policy toward what people can do and what they're placing value on doing.
Yeah.
I'm less comfortable with that than I am saying things like, the road is being damaged and we're putting, and the culverts are crushed, and then sedimentation is getting into the wetlands or something along those lines. I mean, that's more of a, we're trying to protect the right of the access out there more than trying to dictate what the use is. So I guess I do see those two goals as being a little bit parallel, certainly, but a little different in my mind in trying to establish a policy for that, and feel more comfortable about working it on one side than the other.
And maybe I'm,
So rather than prohibiting a use necessarily, I look at it and say, maintain its ability, maintain its condition, prevent its erosion,
Yeah.
those sorts of things,
Yeah.
as opposed to this use is allowed and this one is not necessarily, if there's a way to put that out for it.
and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of my concerns that I'm expressing, and I should wait and see what kind of feedback we're going to get from abutters and other folks like Andy Brazier, who I'm sure the hunting community in town will have some strong feelings as to this topic, pertaining to the use of the road. So I guess we could be optimistic and set a date for a public hearing. Should we maybe try to set a public hearing for abutters only at our next meeting? Is that pretty
At the next meeting,
Yeah,
when did the letter go out?
the 10th, which is, I think, Friday.
As in this last, no, that's too early then, I would think, wouldn't you?
10th was last Wednesday?
So if a letter went out a week ago, let's say, you're feeling like a public hearing a month from now is feasible? Is that enough time? If Carl should get a call and have to attend to some questions and formulate,
Make it March, maybe better.
I would think so, yeah. And I don't have a certain idea about this, I'm just trying to look at the
Yeah.
evolution of the
Right,
answer.
right. And there's no, as far as I can foresee, this first go-around being, I'm thinking of the June town meeting date, we're not asking for any funding, so to speak, and I don't know whether there would be an issue that would have to go to town meeting pertaining to Hebo Highway, this go-around. I think we have to get our arms around this, how we're going to address this issue of use and abuse, and
The town doesn't maintain any part of that road, correct? Yeah, okay.
you want?
Just asking.
No town maintenance at all.
I know you just mentioned that. as an example.
Yeah.
Like they don't go there.
No, this go-around, anyway. Maybe in 2019 or something.
No, she just means, is the town maintaining the road?
Oh,
In
Yeah.
a physical form, the answer is no.
I'll just state for the audience that when the county picked it up, there was no road, there was no paved road as we know it today.
Right.
It was just a right of way that was used, you pick up money,
Yep.
you found a way to make your wagon go around it. And
Right.
even when, by the time it was discontinued, there might have been town maintenance of some sort, on maybe culverts or something
Right.
on some roads, but chances are it still has no road bed.
Right.
So the physics of an ATV or a motorized vehicle working on a road that has no bed at all
Right.
is physics of it it means that road has limits, and anybody that wants to abuse the road, right? Well, I've said enough, but
Has anyone been up within the last 6 months on that road?
I haven't been in past,
Before snow?
before, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not been in, to the town forest to that extent yet, but I followed in as far as to see where the logging was going on, to establish that that was the North Country Land Bob
Yeah.
Libby piece,
Yeah.
which is 1 or 2 lots this side of the town forest.
Yeah. The other whole piece of this that I'm forgetting is that Lebanon, we conveyed the copy of the abutters letter to the Lebanon Conservation Board, and I haven't given them any of this legal stuff because they would have to make their own judgment. But what we gleaned from John Bozak was that their land use lawyer came up with the same conclusion that ours did, that there is a public easement retained on the Hebron Road. We're on the same status, so to speak, of the use of the road, but there has to be, I would think it would only be sensible to have a little give and take with Lebanon on this and have a common set of standards, if you will, or method of
Right,
handling.
well, toward that end, I guess the question would be is it, this worth isn't the right word to put to it, but if we have a certain set of goals and we don't know the process and or the actual definition of the usage is going to be matched by Lebanon, then to what extent are we going to go forward to try to make it on one side but not the other with an open access point between the two towns?
Well, I think that would be the goal, that we have a common set of stated goals.
Right.
Number one.
Right.
And that, it could be as loose as, I won't try to frame any language, but we would hopefully have the same threshold of definition of abuse or something like that, so that,
Do they have the same process as in town meeting?
oh yeah.
Or whatever the
Yeah,
process.
they still have a town meeting form of government, but the only thing, and somebody can check me on this, I think Lebanon has, everything is on a ballot in Lebanon. They don't have an open town meeting the way we do. Do you know that, Virginia?
I think you're right, I think they do have it open
I
down.
don't know what the term is
Yeah,
for that, but
But I
I
don't-
think it's a written warrant, and you go in during
It's open.
town meeting day or whatever,
Mhm.
and you check a box or something. But that's neither here nor there, really. But, I guess there would have to be a meeting of minds of the conservation boards in terms of common goals and standards for meeting them. Well, we could.
Well, that would be one of the big reasons as to why I think, yeah, a public hearing is necessary, but before any sort of language would be crafted that even could come close to town meeting,
Right.
if we don't have everything lined up exactly the same way that Lebanon does, then I don't think it's worth moving forward, as in on some sort of a predetermined timetable.
Right.
It's got to be congruent, and if it's not,
Yeah.
there's too many cracks in the policy,
Yeah.
even if the book.
Should we have like a meeting between the two boards, even
In
prior
February.
to meeting with
That would be
abutters? Because
That would be my vote,
if
maybe.
an abutter in Lebanon's speaking with an abutter in Acton, and
Right,
their conservation commission's telling them one thing, and we're
Right.
telling,
right. How would it be if we tried for a joint meeting with Lebanon in our February meeting? Okay. Does that sound sensible to you, Carlos? Okay. And then as we discuss this more, it will take a shape And we can leave it there for tonight, I think.
So, at our regular February meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if John, I think John Bozak is the chair of that committee, I'm not
I
really
think
sure.
so.
I didn't get a clear sense of that, but he's on the land trust board, so I see him and can contact him easily enough, so I'll try to set that up. Get as many of those folks to join us at the table. Do you have a date for that?
It's February 20th.
20?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other thoughts about Eagle Highway before we move to Town Farm Road? No? Ball's in your court, Steve.
Yep. Give a call to Augusta again to double check on the timing of everything, and what I'm finding is that there have been no approved, as we hear on the news, daily here these days, no federal approved budget means right now no money toward cost sharing of plans
Yeah.
to date.
We have to wait till
The cost sharing is expected to come, it's expected to be at past levels. The
Yeah.
state is already telling me that they're going to presume to grant at levels equal to what has been granted in the past.
Yeah,
If a town were to request projects, more like, pruning or forestry type stuff or whatever, those tend not to be as high on the ladder as the actual inventory plan style work. And the plans are always given priority
which is,
when the money comes in, which is what we're looking at.
yeah.
So if we were to say, the plan usually comes first. Here is the plan, here is an inventory of what we would like to do on a property, here's what the timber is on it, here's what all the other natural assets are on the property. Now you go into looking at what may be funding available for actions on the property. But the punchline is that there is 100% approval generally for a consistent level as in previous years of around 75% of the cost of a plan to be granted to those who request it.
And is this a federal program with state
It's a
implementation?
it is federal money as sent down through the Maine Forest Service in this case,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So,
And what I was told a couple of days ago was that, again, they're waiting for, presumed within a few weeks, there is a budget.
yeah,
They are looking at a end of February, this is presuming it all comes down within a few weeks, that there's a budget. They're looking at an end of February application process with a March presumed awarding
mhm.
of whatever this cost share would be. But the punchline is I'm in a holding pattern, same as everyone.
Can
for
they,
the feds.
can they send you, or do you already have the necessary paperwork to fill out for this thing?
Yeah, there's not really much paperwork to be had, meaning if I'm a member of this board, for example, I could go down and say, here's the map and lot number for this town farm property, here's its acreage, because it's based on acreage.
Yeah,
And then basically they just say, okay, this is your application.
yeah,
Again, if they're working on a presumed 100% approval of this,
yeah.
then that's really all there is to the application.
Is there
It may
any,
require a signature or something on our/my part, but
yeah,
as forester and/or town conservation commission.
do we need a main legislative sponsor in the form of Karen Garish or something like that?
To do what?
To move this, to throw her weight behind this in terms of.
To get a
support?
federal budget?
There's no, what am I looking for there? there's no support that has to be illustrated on the part of the municipality and/or the congressional district or whatever? No, okay, this is between the municipality and the feds and Maine
Well,
Forest Service.
through the Maine Forest Service
Right.
with money.
Okay.
Basically, there is this glob of money that comes down to the Maine Forest Service, and they set the rules upon how it's given out.
Okay.
And that's what I'm understanding.
I spell glob. I like that word.
Glob, B, let's call it B.
Like Gloucester.
I don't know if Forest Service grants or like give money or like action type plans later on, do they give more weight?
Yeah,
to
that's
the
what I was
parcel that
talking about.
has like a plan?
Yes, well, they will not grant money for what they call
Unless you have a
practices
plan.
unless you have a plan.
Yeah, cool.
So you have a plan first, and they are expecting 100% approval for applications for plans. But, and I don't know what's in the docket for plans that have already been accepted for practices from other towns perhaps. But the point is that they will routinely and usually in parentheses, almost always fund all plans before any practices come about. So there's a pretty slim chance that there is not funding for both an Acton and a Lebanon plan if asked.
Are you okay with staying on that project and hopefully
Yep.
bringing that to some sense of completion?
Yep.
Well, thank you for that. Town warrant article, I don't know exactly where we are with that decision that the Board of Selectmen made that no monies will be allocated from this year's proposed budget, 18-19, to support the development of a plan. Is that the way you read that decision from the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the path that we're gonna follow of hopefully getting a green light from Maine Forest Service, I'm not sure how we're gonna weave that into a town warrant article, because we're still,
For the remaining funds, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, again, I guess that's,
we could try again the same,
well, we have a little bit of time to figure that out as if I can work through the verbiage of it with the state and understanding that, again, backing up and looking at this thing from 30,000 feet, if a plan is written, the cost share is based upon the acreage of the lot,
yeah,
and the cost share funding is based upon a rough rule of thumb that it is meant to supply 75% of the cost of a fair market value plan, then we're essentially dealing with an arbitrary 25% remaining. So having said that, the question would be, back in my court, would be to say, in the past, we've said, I'm either going to wait for 25% should a harvest occur, or if a harvest doesn't occur, then yeah, obviously I would want the 25% remaining on the bill. So whether we need to have the proper verbiage by waiting for what the acreage funding is to determine what the 25% remaining is, to put that number into an article, or how we would go about doing that, I don't know, but.
I sense from listening to where the Warrant and Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen are this go-around, they are keeping a very tight lid on additional expenditures. They're asking existing committees and boards to not exceed a 1.5% budget increase over the previous year. So I'm afraid that under that bit of thinking, which I totally understand, but we have no option but to wait and get a firm number to give them.
Yep.
And that would be the best we can do in terms
Well,
of.
and again, to give you a little bit of context in this, the fair market value as defined by the federal government of what this plan, A, entails, B, requires, and C, is funded at, goes up and down all the time.
Yeah,
We're adding this to a plan, but yet we aren't necessarily adding to what the fair market value of that plan happens to be. Or we've decided that it's worth a little more or a little less. So there's a couple of variables before we actually come to that number. So there have been cases where funding was as high as fair market value because their fair market value by definition was higher than what it took to actually produce that plan,
yeah,
in which case the number could be zero.
yeah.
But if funding levels drop and we don't know what the funding levels are right now, then it could happen that the 25% remaining turns out to be, technically speaking, more than what the value of the, I think you're following my logic behind it.
Yeah,
Without me knowing exactly what the number is that's coming down from above, I can't make a lot of comment on that. What happens is the state gives me all of the requirements of what is required within this plan,
yeah.
and I then go, okay, within my professional ability, what can I provide it for?
Do you see that this, we're being too optimistic maybe in thinking that this might proceed for 2018?
No.
I mean, for June town meeting,
Well, the approval will have happened by then, and I presume there's a budget, and the federal government's still in operation. But as far as saying what I can bring back to this committee is some verbiage to go into an article, that wouldn't take more than a couple of conversations between us, I think.
it's where I think we ought to go slowly and build our support in the community on this is the concern expressed by Andy, and I wasn't on at that meeting, regrettably, Andy Brazier, that the management plan encompass wildlife habitat values, including deer yards, he spoke.
Those are all specifically within the requirements of the plan in the first place, right?
I would just be, I think that it's maybe very optimistic to think that we could move that bit of decision-making and confidence building through this early stage for a June town meeting, but I'm willing to try. If you have confidence that it can be done, let's try.
You're asking me to determine public opinion, and I
No, I
can't
just,
really answer.
we had an immediate concern expressed by some individuals that the management plan would not take certain values into consideration. And I think, again, it's just wise to build up your support before you go to town meeting.
Well, again, to look at this thing from above again a little bit, the amount of money that we're talking about that would be the remaining cost number
The 25%.
is not likely going to be measured in thousands, it's most likely to be measured in hundreds, perhaps, or something like that. So I don't think we're talking about an ungodly amount of extra. And unless, well, the plan itself, there should be no opposition to a plan. There might be opposition to work that might happen after the plan or recommended by the plan. So as far as us talking about what it would take to put forth an article to create this thing, I don't know why there would be any opposition at all.
Yeah, if
The
you,
definition of what is in the plan is out there and can be seen by all and can be provided by me. But again, as long as there's not any proposed activity happen before the creation of a plan, the plan's adoption, the plan's in action,
yeah.
I don't know how anyone would say,
I
I don't want you going to get that information, or,
I think there was
you
just
know,
more that there was
right.
cutting going on that was going
Right.
to happen immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as long as everything has its due diligence along the way, then the
Yeah.
plan itself is required information before any action happens.
And if we have, you know, I just would be concerned that we would not give ample time to, such that people thought we were, you know, going too hastily on this, but I hadn't thought it through. If you feel we can get February, March, April, yeah, I mean, there's almost 6 months. And in a sense, we've already started the conversation somewhat by the meeting that Andy attended. Yeah, we'll give it a try.
Well, I mean, again, I don't, welcome to, you know, take any questions on anyone's behalf on that regard, but a plan is just that. It's not bringing about action,
Right.
it is just some proposed activities.
Right.
But within the plan has cultural assets and activities, wildlife assets and activities proposed, and obviously forestry activities and inventories out there. But if, where we are right now is, let's get this plan put together, which defines what's on this property, what its assets are, what the town might do with the property. Unless you can foresee someone specifically, or anyone as a whole, having an opposition to the plan itself, then I don't know why it couldn't happen quickly, that be put together in an article.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just would be a little, I would be surprised if we could get it all together by the time at which, I don't know when they draw the shade on this, in terms of the budget, yeah, development. You know, they have some deadlines, and I meant to bring that paperwork tonight. Well, just keep us informed and as to the process that you're making with Maine Forest Service, and we'll take this as it develops, I guess. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. I have nothing more to bring up with you folks. Any other new business? Okay. Motion to adjourn. This meeting is February 20th.